Hey everyone, I'm Anne. Welcome to the Let's Get Naked podcast, where we dive deep into vulnerability. In this space, we'll explore what triggers us, uncover the patterns holding us back, and discover how to take charge of our own growth. If you're ready to dig in, be vulnerable, and face the tough stuff, then buckle up. It's time to get naked. Today's episode is not easy. It's not light. It's not something that you can just listen to passively in the background while folding laundry. This one demands your attention because the story you're about to hear is every parent's worst nightmare. My guest lost her 17-year-old son to fentanyl. A vibrant, beautiful, curious teenager gone instantly. And not because he was an addict, not because he was chasing a high, but because this drug is a loaded gun in disguise. Fentanyl is now killing more young people than car crashes, gun violence, or any other cause. Let that sink in. We are in the middle of a silent war, and it's one that's stealing our children at a rate that should terrify every single one of us. Just a few years ago, fentanyl was barely a whisper on the public radar. But now, it's the leading cause of death for Americans between the ages of 18 and 45. In 2023 alone, over 112,000 Americans died of drug overdoses, and more than 70% of those deaths were due to synthetic opioids like fentanyl. And the most horrifying part? This crisis is being driven by pills that look exactly like legitimate medication. Fake Percocets, fake Xanax, fake Adderall. Kids are taking what they think is safe and dying in their bedrooms, on their lunch breaks, at parties. Last year, the DEA seized enough fentanyl to kill every American twice. And still it floods our streets, our schools, our social media platforms, sold through emojis and Snapchats and Venmo transactions. Dealers target kids as young as 13. Parents don't even know the war zone their children are walking into every day. It's not an addiction issue anymore. It's poisoning. It's homicide. And behind every single one of those overdose numbers is a devastated family. A mother like my guest today who now wakes up every day and breathes through a hole that will never be filled. Parents who went from planning graduation parties to picking out urns. Siblings who grow up in silence because their brother or sister is never coming home. We lose over 250 kids and young adults every single week to fentanyl. That's like a plane full of kids going down every 7 days. And somehow, we're still not treating this like the national emergency it is. But this mother, this force of nature who is sitting across from me, she's taking the worst pain imaginable and turning it into action. And she's here to make you feel what too many families know firsthand. Because this is more than a crisis. This is a catastrophe. And if we don't wake up, if we don't rage, educate, fight, it will keep destroying lives one child at a time. Today, I'm stripping it all off with Lindsay Taylor. Lindsay is a licensed therapist, speaker, author, podcaster, and the founder of the Soul Soldier Network, of movement, mission, and message for those fighting life's hardest battles. Welcome to the show, Lindsay.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I was reading your questionnaire again this morning, just refreshing myself on your story. And for the listeners at home, with the podcast format, very conversational, I don't pull into your story to kind of prep for your show until the universe kind of pulls me to do that. And sometimes it's a couple of days before, and sometimes it's not. And I told my husband yesterday, he said, "Who's on your podcast tomorrow?" And I said, "I don't know." And I didn't even look because it just wasn't pulling me to do that. And I knew your story from when the girls booked the guests and stuff, not your full questionnaire that I read. But I pulled in this morning, and after my husband had already left for work, I texted him and I said, my story is a woman who lost her 17-year-old to fentanyl. And I knew that that was the reason that I hadn't pulled up your questionnaire, because I have an 18-year-old son that we just took off to college a couple weeks ago. And this is going to be a rough one, and I can't even imagine. And so I'm looking forward to hearing your story, but also excited for other parents that may be listening that really just don't understand how big of a deal this is. I don't think I understand how big of a deal it is. Obviously, you know firsthand. And so I'm interested to diving in and kind of seeing, having you share your story with us, the parts that surround the loss of your son, including other pieces that kind of go into what makes your mission now to be able to help other people, and make your tragedy your testimony. So welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So you start wherever you want to. I don't even know how to lead into that. It's you tell us about kind of some of the things that you've gone through in life, and then we can kind of dive in from there.
Okay. Well, first of all, I don't know, hearing you give that, just heartbreaking, yet the tone as you were giving that introduction of just how truly devastating this is just hit me in all the deepest spots. And when you talked about how it's, the equivalent of an airplane crashing. So I actually wrote a book around my whole story. So it's part memoir, but also part guidebook, because as a therapist, I'm literally working with individuals struggling with the very thing I was walking through. So anyway, the book is a combination of my story and then part guidebook to help others overcome these battles. But in the very beginning, I open up with Jelly Roll shout out to Jelly Roll, he's my favorite. Love his story. He had actually done some fentanyl testimony for Congress, and he said that on average, every day we lose 130 people to overdose, opioid-related overdose. And he said that's the equivalent of a 737 airline jet crashing every single day. And then I took that number with suicide, on average, the number of people that we lose to suicide every day, and that's 132. So numbers are very similar. So these are 132 lives. And I feel like when we talk about, we say numbers, and it's like, but these are lives, and that's 2 airline jets crashing every single day. If we had an airplane crashing every single day for 3 days in a row, it would be a national emergency. Yeah. It would have so much attention. They would be doing something about it for sure. And this has grown into, in many ways, a silent epidemic. People know about it, they hear about it, but it's almost like, well, not me, not my family, right? And it's easy just to kind of set aside and just keep moving on until you've been impacted by it. And here's the deal. I specialize in this sort of thing too, individuals struggling with true addiction. There's 40 million people struggling with addiction. And when you consider the family members that are impacted, it's not just 40 million, it's like triple that.
Right.
So basically what I'm saying is every single person, every single listener has either struggled with addiction, suicidal ideation, or they know somebody who has. And I feel like I talk a lot about addiction and suicidal ideation because that's where my work has been. So yes, those are 2 separate things, but they can also be intermixed. And actually 7 days before I lost my son, I was working at a high school at the time. And there was a student that I was really close to, had developed a really good rapport with. And exactly 7 days before losing Alex, I lost him to suicide. So those 2 really they intermix in my grief journey. Like I lost him, that week was total crisis, just processing my own emotions with it, dealing with our community. Our community was devastated. It was a very traumatic week for all involved. And then 7 days later, literally hours after my student's memorial, is when we got the call about my son. So part of my story really involves both talking about addiction, overdose, fentanyl, marijuana. I want to go there, and also suicide, and just grief and the loss with all those things. So professionally, I'm a social worker. I started out in the child welfare field, and then I ended up moving into school social work. And then when we moved here to Arizona from Colorado, I got into I worked at an adoption agency, case managing birth parents who were placing their child for adoption. And that was the first time that I had really worked with individuals struggling with addiction. That was the first time that I really saw the insurmountable stronghold that addiction has on people. Because what happened was, in that journey, I saw how much these parents loved their kids, how hard it was for them to place that baby for adoption. And oftentimes, the reason they were doing the adoption was because they were on drugs. And so I saw how much it tore them apart to have to do that, to have to hand their baby over to another family. But what a beautiful gift, whether they were on drugs or not. I believe that it's the most brave and courageous decision a mother can make. As a mother, you can only imagine handing your baby over. And so I have so much respect for birth mothers and fathers that make that decision. But I also saw how much it tore them apart. And that job, there was one birth mom in particular that really stood out to me. She was 8 months pregnant, actually 8.5 months. She was literally a few weeks away from her due date. And she had just come to our agency, hadn't had any prenatal care, was on every drug under the sun, including alcohol. I mean, literally anything you could use, she was on. And I just remember taking her to an appointment, and she was telling me a little bit about her story and her other children and the fact that she had raised her other children to a certain point. And she said, this is not the kind of mother I am. Like, I can't believe I'm doing this. And she just broke down crying. I can't believe I'm doing this to my baby. Like, she had never not had prenatal care. She had never carried a baby under the influence. And it just hit her, and she felt so much shame and sadness that that's what she was doing. And in that moment, I just saw the human in her and the mother in her and the pain in her and how strong that addiction was. Like, she didn't want to be doing it, but it had such a grip on her. So anyway, so much. I really, through that job, became very passionate about helping individuals struggling with addiction. Many of them were homeless, so also really working with that population, and then some incarcerated. So I was going into the prisons for some, and I don't know how to explain this. I always say this to people. If there's such thing as past lives, I must have been an addict in my past life, because I'm the most sober person I know here in this life. But when I sit with people who have struggled with addiction or homeless or in prison, like, my soul feels at home with those people. Like, I really relate to those people. I've sat in NA meetings, AA meetings, just as support, and I'm in those meetings and I feel like I'm one of them. And I think what it is just this idea of our shared humanity. Like, I am ultimately, even though I'm super sober, I'm no different than that person. I still have struggles. I'm still broken. I've still walked, I have people, obviously, that I'm very close to that have walked this path. I don't know, our stories might be a little different. Our paths might be a little different, but ultimately I'm human just like them and broken just like them, and are living in this fallen world, if you will. Right. And so anyway, I, through that job, just grew a, honestly, profound respect for individuals that overcome addiction, because I saw how hard it was to fight that demon. And so I always say, and I talk about this in my book, recovering addicts are my heroes. Truly, truly, truly. I love a good recovery story. And so that's part of my mission, which we'll get into. But moving into, from there, I got into school social work. So I worked at a high school for several years, and that's where I really started to get hands-on experience. This was like 2018, so a couple years before COVID. And then obviously when COVID hit, I don't know, something about COVID just totally tanked our kids' mental health. Yes. Everybody, our whole nation, but really our teens and kids began to struggle. And so that was the first time that I really started working with individuals who were suicidal. And obviously it was teens that I was working with. And I mean, these kids, there was nowhere to send them. Like, they would go to hospitals, they would come back out, they'd be oftentimes worse than when they went in, traumatized from these systems. And hospitals have their time and their place, but what I learned is that it's just stabilization, it's not actual treatment. And so I just felt so helpless. Like, how do I help these kids and turn this around and fix this issue, that we were really starting to see this true issue with losing kids to suicide and suicidal ideation. We lost, in a matter of a couple years at our school district, I don't know, at least like 10 kids. I mean, it was, and this is a nationwide problem. Again, it wasn't just our school district, but obviously, just in our little community, we were losing way too many kids. And so that really began to become a part of my passion as well. And like I said, fast forward, May 2nd of 2021, I got the call that I had lost my student to suicide. And so that week was just the most devastating week in my career, for sure. This was definitely a kiddo that had opened up a lot with me. And I remember one night, after his third attempt. He had had 3 attempts prior to when he actually died by suicide. I remember he had come into my office, shared something with me that he had journaled, just processing his feelings. And it was the first time that I truly got a peek into the suicidal mind. And I just could feel the weight of how heavy life was for him. And I just wanted so badly to help him through that, right? And but I didn't know how. I did the best I could with the skills I had at the time. And I knew it was beyond my control ultimately, but so I did what I know how to do, and I just showed up for him, and I just kept trying to support him. But anyway, when he completed several months later, we don't use the word completed. There's terminology around suicide, died by suicide. It just was so devastating for me. So 7 days later, fast forward, my son Alex, so going to him, 2020, that was our marker, March of 2020. So right when COVID hit, is when things really changed with him. So Alex was a competitive gymnast his whole life, from the time he was like 7 until 16. And right before his junior year, he had a lot of injuries from gymnastics. He was getting really burnt out. He was so talented. I mean, it was really sad that he was so burnt out and wanting to quit, because I think he could have gone far with it. But me and my husband totally supported him. I didn't want him to stay in something that he wasn't happy with anymore. However, I knew Alex's tendencies. I knew that if he didn't have stuff filling his time, he could definitely lean towards trouble. I mean, my husband was that teenager too, so I knew that. And then, I did worry that had been his whole identity and his whole life. And it had provided so much structure. I mean, he was gone. Competitive gymnastics is legit. It's like 6 days a week, 3 hours a day. I mean, no off season. It is rigorous. And so, anyway, he had made the decision to quit. We supported him, but I did tell him, like, you got to find something else, because I don't want you just going from that to nothing. So he picked diving. Was very minimal compared to what he had been doing. So he did his first semester of his junior year, which was 2019, fall of 2019. He did diving at his high school, and that was fine, but again, very minimal. So then he got a job for the spring. So spring of 2020, gets a job. COVID hits. He had got really into skateboarding too, right after quitting gymnastics. And so again, great, fine. I mean, I'm glad he found something that he was enjoying. But there's a whole culture and lifestyle that goes with skateboarding, vaping, dabbing. I mean, marijuana was a big part of that. And I love skate park kids. Don't get me wrong; they're my jam. But it's a culture, and there's things that they're doing at the skate park. And so again, knowing his tendencies, I would talk with him all the time, and he knew. He'd even met some of my previous clients that I had case managed that had struggled with like heroin addiction. And I told him, I said, dude, it starts here.
Yes.
Starts with marijuana. Starts with alcohol, where it seems innocent. It seems totally innocent, and it can get away from you. And so we had always had those conversations. But, when you're 16, you also know best.
Sure, of course.
Your parents,
mom know.
Your parents definitely don't know anything, at that age. And so I think a lot of it he just kind of shrugged off ultimately, like a typical teenager. So COVID hits, and he's got all this time on his hands. And that is when me and my husband say that we started to watch him change in front of our eyes. And so I always say, and I think this part, I just think it's very important to emphasize this. I always say we lost him to marijuana first. The fentanyl stopped his heart. The fentanyl was the deadly thing, and it's awful, and it's poison. What you said in the beginning, it is absolute poison. But the marijuana, though, we are underestimating how incredibly dangerous it has become. It is not the marijuana we had. Trust me. When I was in high school, I did drink and I did smoke marijuana. That's all I've ever done in my whole life. But the marijuana that I had back when we were in high school, that was 2 to 5% concentrated of THC.
Yeah, that's child's play. That's child's play compared to what they play with.
Yes. So I went to a youth marijuana prevention conference a couple of years ago, and they were saying that it's upwards, that the oils and carts that people are using are upwards of 99.4% concentrated of THC. Oof. And the bud, just the regular good old bud, is 45% concentrated. So we're talking, we went from 2 to 5% to, like, even with the bud, 45%. And experts are saying that marijuana should never be above, there's a little disagreement. Some say 15%, some say 10. basically we're talking it's well over 10 to 15%. So it's different. And I think we need to, parents, first and foremost, I would urge you to be aware of that, because I can't tell you how many, and again, I don't blame anybody for feeling this way, because it's a plant, it's all natural. I get where that mentality comes from. And many people, but I hear many parents say, I would rather my kids smoke marijuana than drink. I hear people even say that. Careful. Yeah. Because basically what happened was Alex got really into the oils and the carts. And so the pretty hard marijuana, it's really like a hard drug when you're doing that. And then what happened was you got to take a couple different factors. Again, I'm not, bashing on people that choose to use that recreationally. Adults with a developing brain, it's a different story. But when you have a teenager who has a developing brain, it's super harmful. And when you are using in excess too much. And so he was definitely using in excess. Okay. He was not just, here and there at this point. It had become obviously too much. And so what happened was he ended up having marijuana-induced psychosis. And there's tons of studies out there. Go look it up. Harvard has a study that is showing that marijuana is leading to psychosis and sometimes schizophrenia diagnosis. It's really becoming an issue. And so that's what we began to experience with him. We just watched him totally tank. Like, it tanked his mental health. He had really never been like a depressed or anxious kid at all. Alex is not mine biologically, but we raised him from the time he was very little. So at the root, he definitely had some abandonment issues from his mom. And I respect her and love her in this. I talk about that in my book. Like, I want to honor her in this story too. She did the best she could, but was not there. And Alex really struggled with that. And so he did have some of that underlying. But he had never struggled with, he was not a depressed or anxious kid at all. He was always out and about, and we just watched him totally turn into this anxiety-ridden, depressed. Fast forward to December of 2020. So he had ran away. June of 2020, things started just getting really out of control. He ran away because we were like, you cannot do this in the house. We have younger kids. Like, that's where we're drawing the line. At this point, we were on damage control. We knew we couldn't stop him, but we're like, here's some boundaries. And he just wasn't even happy with that. And so finally in September, he had ran away for good. But really what it was he had went to live with this friend, and we just said, all right, we did not, it was so... The harder we pushed, the more he just ran. And so we just were honestly just damage control at that point, trying to work with him, trying to take him to therapy, do what he was willing to do. It was very hard time. But December of 2020, he ended up calling Matt and sharing that he was suicidal. And this is a kid, like a year and a half prior, I was on the crisis team for our school district. We had a suicide. And I remember that night coming home, and we were talking about it. And Alex was like, I just don't understand. That's the most selfish thing. Like, he just could not. He obviously had never been in that headspace. He could not grasp it. And I was really having to talk with him and help him have compassion of where somebody has to be to lead them to that spot. Yeah. And so this is that kid that could not understand it. And fast forward a year and a half later, here he is suicidal. So we hospitalized him, which again, that was like, I knew that wasn't ultimately going to be the fix, but what else do you do? And from there, it was just a really delicate journey. That fast forward to March of 2021, he had called my husband and told him that he was using or had tried fentanyl, knowing that it could kill him. And so we ended up hospitalizing him again. Things were just, again, really tail spinning and spiraling. And it was at that point that I was like, all right, we got to force treatment. I also know in my line of work and with working with individuals struggling with this sort of thing that forcing treatment isn't always the answer, because if the person isn't ready for help, it's not going to help. However, he's still a teen with a developing brain, and I knew at this point we just needed to force it and just hope that maybe something would stick. And so we did not have insurance. There was many factors, and I'm sure families can relate to this too. It wasn't like we could just get him into a treatment center tomorrow. We had to look around and find somebody that we could do a payment plan with. We didn't have a huge savings, so it was a whole production. So we called his mom. He hadn't seen her in probably, 4 to 6 years at this point. And we said, look, can we fly him out to stay with you? We need to get him out of Arizona. At this point, he was in his senior year. He was a 3.0 student, just an average student up until his senior year. And then he began to fail everything, obviously. I mean, just his whole life was tanking. And so he's on his spring semester of his senior year, and he had a couple credits he needed to make up because he had failed some classes. He was hardly getting to school. And I said, at that point, it was the least of our worries. I mean, him graduating at that point was like the least of the concern.
We're just trying to keep you alive.
Right, exactly. But when he was going to his mom's, he still had a chance to graduate. And so we're like, look, focus on school, finish your classes. His school had bent over backwards. I think because he had been a good student up until that final year, they put him in they call it lift labs, where he could make up his credits and do it online. And so they put him in all that. And we said, finish that, and then we'll talk about when you come back for your graduation, you're going to go to treatment. That has to happen. And so went out to his mom's for 5 weeks, finished his classes. So he graduated, and he was begging to come back before his graduation. And I wanted him to go straight to treatment because I was really worried. He was still refusing to come home. He wanted to go back to his friend's house, and I just knew it wasn't good. But he was refusing. And so we ended up, and he swore up and down he would be okay because his graduation was like a couple weeks later. This was the beginning of May. And swore up and down he would be fine. And so we said, all right, we'll give it a chance. And so we had a treatment center lined up. But again, we were going to get past his graduation. And he came back. He flew back that week. So now I'm back to that week of losing my student, the week of May 2nd. So he came back on May 5th. And I just remember being so anxiety ridden because, first of all, I'm dealing with my own grief in this crisis, and he's coming home, and I know he's refusing to come home. He's going to go back to his friend's house. And I just was so worried. I just felt it inside of me, but I couldn't even think about it that day. I remember talking to my coworker on Friday of that week and just sharing with her how I hadn't seen Alex yet. My husband had picked him up, but I was working like really long days that week at the school. And I told her, I was like, I got to get through tomorrow, get through my student's memorial. And then I was looking forward to seeing him on Sunday. It was Mother's Day. So I was like, then I can face it. And I just hope he's okay. Like, I just couldn't think too much about it. And so fast forward to that Saturday, I went to my student's memorial. And that night, my sister was in town. Like I said, it was Mother's Day weekend. So we had decided, it was obviously such a long week, we had decided just to go out to Old Town Scottsdale and have a night out. And so we were out at midnight when my husband's phone rang. And it was a number it was a Phoenix number. And both of us the timing obviously was odd. And so we both kind of exchanged a quick look. And I was like a quick look and like, yes, you should answer it. Mm-hmm. Like, this is really late. My very first thought was it was law enforcement. Just knowing some of the decisions Alex had been making, that was my very first thought. And I quickly watched as my husband answered the phone, like the look of horror take over his face. Like, I've never seen somebody's face look like that. And I instantly knew that quickly the thought went to Alex is dead. And my husband darted out of the bar that we were at, and I froze. I sat there in shock for a minute, and my sister and her boyfriend were across the table, obviously picking up on what was happening. And my sister had the same thought I did. She goes, "Do you think Alex is in jail?" And I just looked at her and I was like, "I think he's dead." And she goes, "Well, aren't you going to go help Matt?" And that was, again, I had just froze. And that in that moment, it jolted me into action. And I got up and ran out to find Matt in the rocks on his knees, still on the phone. And I just started saying, "Is he dead? Is he dead?" And he was just signaling to me to wait. And he hung up the phone and he said, "It's the charge nurse at Chandler Regional." His friend, Alex's friends brought him in. He had no pulse. They were able to revive him. They worked on him for 16 minutes, were able to revive him, but he's in critical condition. It's serious. We need to get there. And I can't explain like that moment and the millions of emotions that you experience all in one moment. Like I felt mad, sad, confused, hurt, even faintly hopeful, like hearing that they had revived him. Like I just like all these emotions. And so my husband was completely distraught. He started walking away at one point. I had to get him to come back and like, we need to go. And so I went into like, okay, I got to like get us to the hospital. My husband was in no condition to drive. So quickly, I mean, my sister and her boyfriend are settling the bill as all this is happening, and they come out. And so we get to the car and we drive to the hospital, and we get there and they take us back into this room, and the charge nurse meets us in there, and he just starts explaining that they were still trying to figure out. We saw his friends outside the hospital. That's a whole nother story, but they were trying to figure out what happened. But essentially he just was, saying that he's on a ventilator and they're not sure, what damage has been done. He obviously didn't have a pulse when his friends arrived with him. And so they don't know how long he went without oxygen. So he just started describing like what we would see when we walked into the room. And we walked into that room and, I hadn't seen him in a couple months because, he was at his mom's and, I was supposed to see him that next day for Mother's Day. So it was Mother's Day at this point. And he's just hooked up to all kinds of machines and they're suctioning. He had aspirated a ton. I actually think that's what ended up being the bigger issue for him. It was awful. It was awful. I just kept, saying, I'm so sorry, buddy. Like, I just couldn't believe, like, looking at him that we ended up here, Nobody's immune. That's for darn sure. But I think we are, you know what I mean? Like, it's just human nature, obviously, to not anticipate those things to happen. Like, not my kid, not my family. Mm-hmm. And our story wasn't one of a kid who struggled for years and years, a kid who had this whole back story of mental health struggles. Sure, like I said, he had some of his underlying issues, but nothing out of the ordinary. And then, yes, that last year had definitely went down a path with the marijuana and one thing led to another, but it happened so fast. I think that's the thing. Like March of 2020 to May of 2021, that was it. I mean, my brain was trying to make sense of how we got here.
I can't even get my head around it. Just thinking about, you're a therapist who's in the space of providing help to teenagers who are struggling with all of the things that you're now dealing with. And then it just, no one is immune. No, literally, no one is immune.
I literally that was one of the biggest things too during that time, especially that spring of 2021. I kept thinking like, how can I help these kids and these families when I can't even help my own? It was such a helpless time and such a helpless feeling. Like I should definitely know how to help my kid. I'm helping these families. How can I not? And it was just, it's obviously different when it's personal. It's your own thing. I mean, like I said, I'm Alex's mom. Other teens love me. They want to listen to me, not Alex. He didn't want to listen.
Not your own.
He didn't want to listen to anything I had to say. And I get it. I was mentoring a teen recently and, he didn't want to talk to his parents, but he would talk to me. And it's like, it's just normal. It's just, I get it. But it was such a helpless feeling. And I met another mom. I interviewed her on my podcast. Our stories mirror each other, sadly, but they really mirror each other. She's a therapist, lost her son to fentanyl, just handsome, really great in general kid, and I think every kid is a good kid. I just think obviously some kids make poor choices, but so do all of us, and adults. But like, but just a pretty, average kid. And, like even all the experience and the knowledge and everything I had, I still didn't know how to help my kids. So I always say that, like, I have so much compassion for parents, because I'm like, I can't imagine even having the skills and tools and knowledge that I had. I didn't even know what to do.
Yeah.
I didn't even know how to help my kid. I still felt like my hands were tied. I can't imagine parents that don't even have that backing, you know? So yeah, no one is immune. And I just, you know, we would later go on that day. So they ended up having to airlift him to Phoenix Children's Hospital because he was still under 18, and so they couldn't treat him there. So they airlifted him to Phoenix Children's. So that morning we're waiting in the ICU to get back into his room. And I actually feel like this is a really important part of the story that really is important to the next step in my journey and where I went from there with the grief. So I'm going to back up for just a minute. End of April. I mean, it's crazy, the timeline too, the divine timing of all this. So it was like April 29th. I remember the dates very clearly. I had an intern at the school, and she came into my office one morning. She was telling me about this psychic medium that she had saw. And I was kind of like, at the time, didn't know how I felt about that, but was listening to her tell her story and thought it was really cool. But I was like, again, not sure how I felt about that kind of thing. And she was like, Lindsay, you need to go see this guy, because I had actually lost a friend to suicide in 2018. So she was telling me I need to see him because of that situation. There was a lot of unanswered stuff around that. And so, you know, I'm just listening to her talk, and all of a sudden I kind of went from like skeptical, like, I don't know, to I just felt this really strong like nudge and whoosh wash over me, like, you need to go see this guy. So instantly, like almost, you know, impulsively, I'm like, okay, I'm going to text him right now. So I text the guy. Literally don't know hardly anything about him. He doesn't ask anything about me. He just gets my name and email to send me the Zoom link, and I set up a meeting for the following Wednesday. So this is May 5th. Mm-hmm. So fast forward to May 2nd, I get that call about my student. And that was one of the first things that crossed my mind was how weird that I'm going to go see this medium. I don't even know how I got here. Why am I even seeing this guy? And I just am going through this loss. So that was weird. That popped in my mind. I thought the timing was weird. I almost canceled the appointment because, like I said, it was such a chaotic week. May 5th was the day Alex came home, but I was like, no, I'm going to keep it. Long story short, I'm in the session with this guy, and I mean, just like he's blowing my mind. The stuff he is saying, the stuff he's calling out, I couldn't believe it. And at one point he says to me, well, first of all, he said, are you going to specialize in suicide? And at the time I was like, I didn't even know that was a specialty. Like I'm working with students that are struggling with this. I'm obviously dealing with it a lot, but specialize, I had no idea what he was talking about. And then he said, they're saying it comes in threes. And instantly I had this sinking feeling that like something was going to happen to Alex. That's not what he was saying, but that's what I felt in that moment. And of course I wanted to disregard it. Like, no. Then he says, what's the deal with the rainbow? I said, I have no idea. And he said, what does a rainbow mean to you? And I said, hope. That was the first thing that came into my mind, hope. Mm-hmm. He said, okay, there's something really strong with a rainbow. You need to pay attention to that. So I was kind of like, okay, that's random. I mean, some of the things he was saying, I didn't understand. It was random. At the end of the call, he brought up the rainbow again. He said, there's something with the rainbow. You need to pay attention to it. So now fast forward, we're in the ICU, waiting to get back to Alex's room. And my husband, he was totally skeptical of this whole psychic medium thing, but I had recorded it and had he at least listened to it. So he had heard the whole conversation. Mm-hmm. So he's skeptical, heard the conversation, so he at least understands. So we're sitting in this ICU room, and all of a sudden he goes, oh my God, Lindsay, look up at the window. And I was it was just, of course, we had not slept. I was startled the way he said it. It was almost like he saw ghosts, and I was like, I hesitated, and he's like, look up at the window. And I look up, and across the window, it says #look for the rainbow. And in that moment, I was like, oh my gosh. Like it was so weird, but for a quick moment, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Like it didn't feel right for that moment, but a quick moment, I just felt this peace. And both of us, it was a huge turning point for my husband. We just felt it. Mm-hmm. And I can't describe it, but I always say that what transpired from there what would happen from there really made me realize through this journey of losing Alex that there is something far beyond our human comprehension to all our lives and stories. And I really leaned into that. I also, like a week prior to that psychic medium situation, so I don't know, around April 20th timeframe, I had my fitness trainer of all people, the least suspecting person to have this conversation with, we started talking about God and spirituality. And I was telling him that I'm more spiritual, not really religious, but really I didn't have a relationship with God much at this point at all. And, but I was good. I wasn't searching or seeking. And he was really adamant that I join this alpha group that he had just joined for people that are newer to Christianity. And I was kind of like, no, I'm good. And again, this guy does not have these conversations. I don't know if he's ever had a conversation like that ever again. Like it was so odd that we were having this conversation, but he was really, and he's a friend of ours now, but he was really pushing me. And so I finally said, I've again, kind of like that experience with my intern, I ended up feeling a nudge. I said, okay, fine, I'll try it. So I had just joined also like a week before this alpha group. To explore getting back into Christianity. I grew up in the church, but veered away, went more spiritual. Anyway, so we're in the ICU and just all these things are happening. We get back in Alex's room. We end up losing him later that day. We ended up having to pull the plug.
On Mother's Day.
On Mother's Day. Yeah. So I'll go there for a minute before I finish the rainbow thing. That day, at one point, we almost lost him without he was very unstable. And so the doctor, had come out when we were in the waiting room and said, look, we're going to do all that we can, but it's not looking good. It really doesn't look like he has any brain activity, but let's go through the day and see. And so we went through the day, and it was later in that afternoon, they basically came in and said, there's just nothing. And so at that point, we had decided that we were going to have to pull the plug. And so we ended up, Alex was the oldest of 4. So he had a brother who was 14 at the time and a sister who was 7, because they were 10 years apart and they were the closest. Him and the 7-year-old were very close. I think maybe that age difference, he was such a big protector to her, and she looked up to him so much, and they just absolutely adored each other. So he had brother 14, a sister who was 7, and then a sister who was 2.5. So our youngest was pretty little. So we knew that at this point we needed to bring them down and tell them. And so next to losing Alex, that was the hardest thing I've ever had to do, was to watch his siblings' hearts break as we told them. We had told my sister just to tell them that Alex was in the hospital, but we wanted to tell them in person, and we wanted to see the day play out to see what was going to happen. So they didn't know anything other than he's in the hospital. And so my sister brings them down. We decided to leave the youngest at home just because she was so little, but we brought Austin and Ari to the hospital and, told them that Alex was going to be going to heaven. And Austin, of course, could understand it all, but poor Ari. She was trying to wrap her little 7-year-old brain around it. And she was so close to him. It was horrible. It was horrible. The hospital was amazing. They gave us necklaces and this book called The Invisible String, and, helped us prepare for that conversation. But yeah, it was hard. And so we ended up giving them the option. We said, do you want to go in and say goodbye? And they both chose to, but again, we tried to prep Ari for what she was going to see, but I don't think she could really wrap her head around it. But they both chose to go in there, and instantly when they went in the room, Ari it was traumatic for her. It scared her, and so she didn't stay long. And they left, and then my husband, went and told the doctors that it was time. And I just remember having this moment, to your point about Mother's Day. I just remember sitting there, and my husband's on the left side of Alex, and I'm on the right, and he's in between us. And I just remember thinking, here we are on Mother's Day, just me and Matt by his side, like it had been his whole life. But he's passing away on a day that really was at the root of his struggle, like the pain of not having his biological mom. And, you know, and he always looked, obviously, like I was mom in his life. But, you know, I fell short in many ways, too. I was 18 when I started helping my husband raise the boys. And so I always say Alex was my greatest teacher. I did my growing up with him. And so, you know, I did the best that I knew how. Everything I did along the way was with the best of intentions, but I didn't always get it right. And so I just felt so sad for him that he struggled with that. And here he is passing away on a day that painfully mirrored some of his struggles. And it was just all so surreal. Like, I don't know. You know, I talk about all this in my book, and sometimes it's a little easier to write about. But you know, yeah, I don't know. There's just really no words. There's no words for how sad it really was, all of it. And, yeah, and just us there again. And so, you know, we wrote it out with him, and that was traumatic. That was a very, you know, having to pull the plug and sit with him through that was it wasn't a peaceful experience. So
there aren't words. I mean, there aren't words.
Mm-mm.
As a mom, you're not supposed to go through a fraction of that. But you look at the loss of the student, right? Like just the whole order of all of this stuff, and I understand what it feels like to parent from a place of fear. You know, as you're talking about that year and a half kind of leading up to that, we had some pretty significant struggles with our middle daughter, and nothing prepares you for that. That's not, you know, you talk about you did the best that you could and you didn't do everything right. You did everything perfectly because that's just what life is, you know, and there's no book that tells you how to parent from this place of just pure fear when you can't control anything, when you can't help them, when they won't listen, when the help that you give them is actually pushing them away. You know, and then to have it end like this, which is, to me, the most unimaginable horror. It
is. You know, to your point, a year earlier when Alex had ran away after the first time, I remember a day where I was feeling so sick to my stomach. I was just so sick with the choices he was making, the path he was going down, and not being able to fix it or change it. And I realized, I think as parents, we have this false sense of control. Like, obviously, the best of intentions, we love our kids so much, we just want to, and we can usually see what they can't, you know, and that's like with anybody in life. Usually when we're outside the situation, we can see things, but we think that we have this control. And what you come to realize as your kids get older is they're their own people.
Yeah.
And they make their own choices. And in this moment, I just remember being so physically ill, and I prayed to a God I didn't even know at the time, or, you know, hadn't had a relationship with at the time. I always believed in God, but just was not connected. And I got down on my knees and I prayed because I was so broken and hurting in that space. And I just remembered I heard, turn inward and surrender. And so I will say that moment, something switched, and I was like, I need to focus on what I can do, what I can say, how I'm showing up. Like, all I can do is focus on me and control me and my actions and what I'm doing through this. I can't control him. I can't change him. He's going to make these decisions. He has to make these choices. And unfortunately, I have to let him fall a little bit and just control what I can. And so I switched from trying to have control to influence, like showing up as like a loving presence with boundaries and structures. I talk about this in my book. When you're dealing with somebody who's struggling and a true addicts, boundaries and structure, boundaries in place is very important. But you have influence, and so I was always like, buddy, I'm here for you. Like, when you need, when you're ready for help, or when you need this, like, I'm here for you. And I just, really managed my own emotions and not projecting my own fears or whatever on him. Like, I just tried to focus on what I could control, and I surrendered the rest. And surrender also, I think when we say surrender, some people feel like it's like give up. No, surrender is this deep place of, I give it over to something higher than me because this is so much bigger than me.
Yeah.
That's what surrender is. This is so much bigger than me.
Yes.
I'm not giving up. I'm still trying my absolute hardest, but I'm not going to let it tear me down anymore. What happened was I switched from, I wasn't going to let it destroy me and my health. And so I had that moment. And so I will say, walking through the actual passing with Alex, that, I mean, God was preparing me. God was preparing me a year before Alex passed away. We were losing him that whole year. That's why I say we lost him to the marijuana first, but the fentanyl was just the final. And I shouldn't say just the final. I mean, it's horrible, and it was the final. Has fentanyl not been around, he would obviously still be alive. Might still be struggling. I don't know what his path would have looked like, but my husband even was a very rough teenager, made many horrible decisions. And my husband's like, I don't know if I would be alive either if that was around. So that's where the fentanyl is awful, because it really is robbing teenagers of that typical teenage experimentation phase, which is not good, but it's robbing them of being able to make bad choices,
right? Because they're permanent,
and come back from it,
right? Because they're permanent, and you just don't. They don't even realize it. That's the biggest scary part of it. Is like you cannot play around.
No, and he got his, back to what you said in the beginning. He got his off Snapchat, and there was absolutely no accountability. The police didn't do anything about it, and we just didn't really fight it. But they're just selling them on Snapchat like it's no big deal, and nobody's accountable. And I know that there's some mothers out there. I've sadly, connected with many people who have lost their children to fentanyl through this, and many off of Snapchat. And so there's people out there fighting it, and I'm so glad, because it's very needed. But this is a crisis. I mean, now, like I said, I still know some people who struggle with addiction from my previous job that now, they were on heroin. Now it's all fentanyl. So even for addicts, it's all fentanyl on the streets. So it's just fentanyl is so much more potent, and it's what they say 10 times stronger than morphine, and so it's keeping people, even in that crisis with those that struggle with addiction, more addicted. It's just adding to the issue is all it's doing. And then to your point, it's taking innocent kids and teenagers' lives who are really, many are taking what they think is a Xanax, and it's fentanyl. We believe that Alex knew he was taking fentanyl, obviously, with the path he was going down. But I don't believe he was taking it that night. I mean, actually, so his friends lied to us about what happened that night. That's a whole nother story. And I do think I'll just briefly say this piece that, I'm sure they were afraid of getting in trouble. And so they did not call 911. And from what we've been able to piece together through other friends coming forward is that it's likely that they wasted about 45 minutes to an hour trying to get them to the hospital themselves instead of calling 911. And every minute matters. So this is what I want people to hear. Like, talk to your kids. Every minute in an overdose situation matters. We do have the life-saving Narcan. And so had they called 911 right away when they noticed that Alex was in trouble, maybe his life could have been saved for sure, had help come sooner. And also, again, the biggest thing, you got to turn, if you're ever, let your kids know, if teens are listening, if you're ever in this situation and somebody has passed out from a drug, you got to turn them on their side, because he aspirated a ton. And I actually believe when the autopsy came back, his fentanyl levels were actually lower than what they consider overdose range. Now, granted, I mean, I don't know how much that really says, but my point is it wasn't like he had this massive amount of fentanyl in his system. So I think they did rule it a fentanyl overdose, and I say poisoning, but I think the aspiration was actually what really killed him, what really fled out his lungs. And so if he would have been turned to his side, called 911, I think it would have changed a lot. And so I just say that for awareness. Tell your kids, if teens are listening, it's important to take some of those life-saving measures and to know. And again, I think the reason his friends didn't call 911 was they were afraid of getting in trouble. And there's a Good Samaritan law. And so I also think we need to talk about that the Good Samaritan law protects you from getting in trouble, liability, if you find yourself in that situation that somebody's in not doing well and needs emergency help. And so they could have called 911 and nothing would have happened to them.
Super important to know. Okay. So as listeners, know that and make sure to share that with your children, because our kids are playing with fire. And like you said earlier in the show about how different things were when we were growing up as compared to now, as parents, educate yourself about what that looks like, because it's scary AF. Like, You just cannot even get your head around, this is small amounts. This is stuff where it's a couple of grains of salt. They don't even realize they're getting that. A lot of times they think they're just playing around with something else. And that's a game over situation.
It is.
And then to look at what that devastation causes to the families.
Yeah.
With you working in schools, is that something where you feel like they bring awareness to that with the teens, just so that they understand the Narcan, the Good Samaritan law, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, they're starting to. So in our school district, we do this thing called teen mental health first aid. Youth mental health first aid is the adult version. Teen mental health first aid, where we go in and teach all it has to be 10th grade and above, and so they're teaching all the juniors this. But we have added that to the presentation because it's broken into 3 parts, and it's all about how to help a friend who's struggling, whether it's with mental health or the third section is on overdose. And so we do show them the recovery position, turning them on the side, and we talk about the Good Samaritan law. So in our school district, I do think more school districts are starting to talk about those things, but I don't know. I don't know how much, outside of our school district, how much it's talked about. But I think that's a key piece that, even adults, like I just had a situation where somebody was telling me that, somebody was not doing well and they were debating if they should call 911 or not. I don't know. People have a fear of calling 911. Yeah. And so just know that you would rather have your friend mad at you than dead, or, and you're not held liable in those situations. You are protected by that law. So yeah, I just think it's, something that needs a lot more attention. But I do think schools are waking up to that. This is the other thing, talking about, we did some fentanyl testimony in Colorado a couple years ago. We got connected with a group out there, and where was I going with that? What was I saying right before that?
The fentanyl testimony in Colorado.
Where was I going with that? Oh my gosh, I totally lost my train of thought.
Okay,
there was something important with that.
Well, if it comes back to you in the next 2 minutes,
if it comes back, it'll come back. Sorry.
That's okay.
I want to get back on my train of thought with that.
No, that's okay.
All right. Well,
that one's gone.
Yeah, that
happens more and more as you get older.
I know, right? Oh man, too much. There's so many angles of this. I'm just trying to see what will come back real quick. What was I saying right before that with the Good Samaritan law?
Yeah, just the testimony to the other kids, and how are we educating our other kiddos, and in the schools that they're going to be more. Well, that's okay.
Yeah,
that's okay.
It lost me.
That's okay.
Yeah. So anyway, it's something that needs more attention for sure.
It does, and it's interesting because in doing the research and having this blurb about an airliner going down full of kids once a week, how many days in a row or how many weeks in a row would we stand for that? Wake up, people.
I know.
Wake up, for all of us. That's me included. I couldn't be happier to have kids that are no longer in high school, because that was a hard thing where you literally feel like you're feeding your kiddos to the wolves. We felt like that most specifically with our middle daughter, where she's trying to stay out of trouble, and you send her back in there, and it is literally it's like everywhere. It's everywhere. So,
okay, that's where I was going.
Okay,
I remember.
All right, quickly.
So, they're saying that basically if they're getting it off the streets, it's all laced with fentanyl. Yes. So even the marijuana. So where I was going with that was, we had my final year that I was at the school, many kids, many meaning a few, that we had to call the ambulance because they had hit a weed pen and it had something else in it, and they passed out and weird things were happening. And so my point is, it's everywhere. I ended up moving to a suicide treatment center, and that's where the full circle with what that medium was saying. And again, that's another story for another day. But I did leave the school and went to actually work at first of its kind suicide treatment center that happened to come to our school district. And the problem persists with these issues with kids, easy access to all this stuff on campuses, and then kids struggling with suicidal ideation. It's really, destroying their mental health. And
it's a big deal. Mm-hmm. Well, I applaud you for being brave enough to come share your story with us today. It's powerful, and I hope brings awareness to people that just maybe don't have the the volume of what and the weight of what this issue really is for us. As a society, it's not just a family problem. It's a big deal.
It's a huge deal.
I won't be able to get the airplane out of my head for a while because it's that big of a problem. So thank you for sharing your story and helping to bring awareness. So Lindsay's information will be on our guest page. If you want to learn more about her book, what she's doing. I'm sorry that we didn't have time to get to that.
I know, there's so much.
An hour just flies right by, but Lindsay's doing important work that you'll have to, go check her out on our guest page, and all of her links will be there. So for this week, may I suggest educating yourself as it relates to fentanyl and really being able to speak with your children about that. One of the things that I always had with my kids is, no meth, no heroin, no exceptions. And we started that very, very young, but I was actually just talking with my middle daughter yesterday who said, Mom, that saved me a lot of different times. Not that that's going to save her from other stuff that gets there, but just don't be afraid to talk to your children, I guess is my point of, they know. We give them computers in their pockets that are as powerful as the richest man on the planet. They know how to get this shit. And it's not a surprise. So that's our time for today. If you have questions, suggestions, or think you have a story you want to add, make sure to reach out to us, DM, or send us an email, ladies@letsgetnakedpodcast.com. Do all the things to support the pod so we can continue to do this important work. Follow, share, rate, and review, and we will catch you next time. That's a wrap.